While we went through dry spells at times, when looking back at 2022, it feels like it was a great year for PlayStation 5 gamers. There was something for everyone this year, from bombastic open-world games to thought-provoking single-player narratives, to a nice collection of out-of-the-box indie titles to keep everyone entertained. Hey everyone, welcome to Play, Ranked, Share, the show where I play the marquee PlayStation 5 titles, create an ever-evolving ranking of the best PlayStation 5 games, and share my opinions with you. My name is Tyrus, and this episode is my Game of the Year video for 2022, where I share my top 10 titles released to the console. Make sure to chime in and let me know what your Game of the Year is in the comments below, and with that out of the way, let's jump in. Tinykin is a pure love letter to collectathon platformers that were popular during the PS1 and PS2 console generations. In this game, you play as Milo, who crash lands on Earth to explore it, only to find himself shrunk down to the size of a bug, and he must escape the house that he is trapped in. To get the platinum in this game, you have to search over every inch of the 6 levels with meticulous detail to make sure that you have found every collectible. Whether that be pollen or alien creatures called Tinykin, whose Pikmin-esque powers help you solve the puzzles that are littered around the levels. Tinykin can be a quick game to beat if you mainline the story. It would only take you about 6 hours. However, the real magic is exploring the game to find all the secrets and gaining an appreciation for the wonderfully crafted levels presented to you. Tinykin is a very chill experience. There isn't much skill needed to complete this game aside from a very keen eye. I think it's a great palate cleanser to have fun with in between large, more story-intensive games. PlayStation gamers were graced when Inscription finally came to the console in August. A roguelike deck builder game with horror elements, Inscription is truly an experience like no other. You begin this game finding yourself trapped in a cabin with a stranger who forces you to play a card game with him. I had so much fun learning how new cards interact with each other or how options to mod your current cards could help me create an unbeatable deck. On top of this engaging gameplay, Inscription has one of the strongest narratives in a game this year. I was hooked not only by the deck building design but also the unpredictability of the story and where it would take me next. If you are a fan of deck building games, I recommend you check out Inscription, and do it quickly before you get the story spoiled. A Plague Tale Requiem should be the textbook example of how you create a sequel. Requiem picks up the story of A Plague Tale Innocence almost directly where it left off, while also expanding the scope of the game and addressing critiques from the original installment. Playing as Amicia once again, you must care after your brother Hugo, whose unique ailments bring a rat plague wherever he goes. You must untangle the mystery of how to cure your brother, bringing the characters to many different locations around medieval France. While it has combat mechanics, you are best off playing Plague Tale like a stealth game. If you are not careful, Amicia can easily get overwhelmed by her enemies. The game also features unique puzzles that revolve around the hordes of rats, who luckily are averse to light, giving the protagonist some hope for survival. Since it is a stealth game, I'm worried some players will turn a blind eye to A Plague Tale, but I highly recommend it for how strong of a game it is, and the compelling story told across its campaign. If you have been faithfully watching Play, Rank, Share the past couple months, then I want to issue an apology for constantly talking about Nobody Saves the World, but this game is just that good. From Drinkbot Studios, Nobody Saves the World is an action dungeon crawler game that has you playing as a nobody, who seemingly finds themselves in a situation where they must stop evil forces from destroying the world. The unlikeliest of heroes, you are equipped with the ability to change your form on the fly, from the practical to a knight or an archer, to the more absurd forms like a turtle or a bodybuilder. I enjoyed playing Nobody the most through its co-op mode, since you can experience difficulty spikes at times, and I found it best to explore these dungeons with a partner by my side. An arcade action game at its core, Nobody weaves humor well into its writing, adding layers to an otherwise straightforward plot. One of the funniest games on the console, Nobody has a fun gameplay loop to back it up, and I highly recommend everyone checks it out. Who knew that being in charge of a cult could be so much fun? Cult of the Lamb is equal part town management and roguelike game, as you are chosen to rebel against the gods of your lands and start a cult to give you the power to defy them. The weakness of Cult of the Lamb is that the combat systems do not feel amazing to me. While they're still fun, I just found myself wanting to get through the dungeons to get back to the town management portion of the game. This is where I think Cult of the Lamb especially shines. You can have your cult members automate chores around the settlement for you, marry them to help increase morale, or sacrifice them for a little bit of extra cash. Pivotal decrees you make in the game help shape the cult to make yourself the true cult leader you always dreamed of becoming. Sifu offers a brutal difficulty curve with just the right amount of length. In Sifu, you seek revenge for the death of your father and hunt the 5 individuals involved in the murder to enact your revenge. You are in possession of your father's talisman that brings you back from the dead, but ages you a little quicker every time you do so. This leads to a great deal of replaying levels in Sifu, as you want to die as little as possible in each level in order to give yourself more wiggle room when facing more difficult bosses later in the game. It took me around 15 hours to beat this martial arts game with the crushing difficulty, and I thoroughly enjoyed playing through each of the levels and continuously doing so to lower my death counter. I think there is some barrier to enjoying Sifu. You need to be content with failing multiple times. But with the repetition in playing these levels comes a sense of mastery, as you learn optimal ways to proceed and find shortcuts to make subsequent runs faster for you. Sifu is also one of the most polished indie games that I've played on the PS5 yet, and if you are okay with the difficulty, I bet you will have a fantastic time playing through this gem of a game. If Horizon Forbidden West came out in 2021 like it was initially slated for, I think it would have been a slam dunk choice to be Game of the Year. Now, coming out in the much more crowded 2022, I think Horizon is a bit lost in the shuffle. Simply put, Horizon Forbidden West is one of the most polished open-world games that you will play, with a captivating sci-fi story attached to it. Following the footsteps of the first game, protagonist Aloy now has a grander adventure awaiting for her. Traveling across the western United States, you encounter a more varied set of robotic dinosaurs and various groups of colonists as players learn more about the world that Horizon takes place in. I feel like in some cases, Horizon Forbidden West suffers from open world game bloat, and that slightly drives down the overall experience as you're introduced to components that aren't as important to the core gameplay and frankly aren't that fun. Overall though, I had a great time learning more about the world of Horizon, shooting down those giant dinosaurs, and I cannot wait to play the DLC called Burning Shores when it comes out in April of next year. Do remakes and remasters have a place on Game of the Year lists? I'm not really sure, but I'd be remiss to not include The Last of Us Part 1, as it deservedly belongs on every Game of the Year list this year. The Last of Us is in the highest pantheon of gaming history as one of the absolute best quality titles that you can play, and this remake does justice to the original. The original release of The Last of Us is my favorite game of all time, and it felt so good to revisit Joel and Ellie's story in this revamped game. Stuck in a zombie apocalypse, Joel must transport Ellie across the country, evading both the living and undead alike. On this replay, I had a greater appreciation for the plot of the game, knowing what is awaiting these characters in the sequel. The Last of Us generates plenty of tense combat experiences, as you have limited resources, making the player carefully think through how many bullets they want to use before engaging with enemies. Sometimes, I even use stealth to avoid combat sequences entirely, in order to hang on to my melee weapon or the last few bullets in my revolver. I truly believe that The Last of Us Part 1 has the highest production value in a video game, in addition to some of the best motion capture and storytelling elements, even as this story nears being a decade old. Those of you who never played The Last of Us when it initially came to the PS3 in 2013 are in for an absolute treat when you play The Last of Us Part 1 for the first time. I have been spending weeks going back and forth on my ordering of this Game of the Year list, especially on what should be number 1. After much deliberation, I'm ranking Elden Ring as my second favorite game of 2022. I think I shouldn't like games like Elden Ring. I don't normally like brutally difficult games, and Elden Ring is just the second game I've ever played in the Soulsborne genre, after playing Demon's Souls at the launch of the PS5. But I was enamored with the over 50 hours I put into Elden Ring. One of my fondest memories is being stuck on one boss late in the game that wrecked my primarily magic-based build. I ended up spending over half a dozen hours trying to defeat this boss, including eventually giving up and going out to seek new spells, better equipment, and a new spirit ash to just hopefully overcome this boss and finish the game. By the time I defeated it, my character and my strategies were completely different, and it was one of the most satisfying moments I have felt in a game. And Elden Ring is filled with plenty of moments just like this one. Being saddled with a vast open world map and no real direction, you can easily get lost in the various different biodomes and wide array of enemies that you can encounter. Every step has to be carefully planned, as you can quickly find yourself getting lost and wandering into an enemy encounter you aren't prepared for. Elden Ring is my most played game of 2022, and it still feels like I only scratched the surface of a game that will shift how we talk about open world games in the years to come. God of War Ragnarok is not only my favorite game of the year, it is one of my favorite games of all time. I think Kratos is the most redeemed character in video game history, going from bland, generic character in the PS2 era to one of the most deep and complex that we have seen in recent years. God of War Ragnarok feels like the payoff to the massive amount of investment that Sony has put into the PlayStation studios over the past decade. The combat in Ragnarok is some of the greatest and most fun I have experienced. It feels so satisfying to chain combos together through hordes of enemies. Meanwhile, there's a deep, compelling story that spans the 20-hour campaign, with dozens of hours of side content that to me felt just as essential to play through as the main story. In addition to Kratos and Atreus, Ragnarok fleshes out a motley crew of side characters, both good and bad, to add depth and consequences to every action that our protagonists take. While this is the end of the Norse era for God of War, I cannot wait to see what direction the franchise takes into the future and how they heighten the experience from here. Between this trifecta of God of War Ragnarok, Elden Ring, and The Last of Us Part 1, I believe PS5 gamers were spoiled this year with games that we will be talking about for the rest of the generation. Without a doubt, I think that this is the strongest year of games in the PS5 lifecycle so far, and it feels like the console is finally establishing a steady cadence of high-quality releases. Now looking to the future, 2023 seems poised to provide even more marquee games for console owners to consider playing. And that has been this episode of Play, Rank, Share. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when future episodes are released. If you like this video, I recommend you check out my top 10 indie PS5 games of 2022, or a list of 10 hidden gems on the platform. What was your game of the year? Be sure to leave a comment below. I would love to hear your thoughts, and until next time, don't stop sharing.